It really gives me particular pleasure this morning to open our conference on the International Tracing Service Collections and Holocaust Scholarship, to be sharing the podium and the opening words of welcome with the new director of the International Tracing Service in Bad Arolsen, Germany, Dr. Rebecca Boehling, with whom the museum's Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies has co-organized this conference, adds further distinctiveness to this particular event. Dr. Boehling held a research fellowship here at the museum in one of the first years that our now internationally recognized fellowship program was pilot tested. So Dr. Boehling is, from a professional perspective, part of our family. In her new position, Dr. Boehling is working on a long-awaited transformation of the ITS from an isolated, more or less hermetically sealed institution into a responsive resource for Holocaust survivors, for their families, and for the families of victims lost forever, and for others who suffered persecution and displacement at the hands of Nazi Germany and her allies. Transformation into an institution that is an active member of the international network of organizations dedicated to Holocaust education and research. Transformation into an organization that provides incontrovertibly authentic material for use in Holocaust education, and into an institution that fosters new research on topics where the ITS collections offer new perspectives and new insights because of the singular focus on the victims and their experiences that make the ITS collections unique. In these endeavors, this museum and the ITS in Bad Arolsen, Germany, are of one mind. And the fact that scanned copies of all ITS collections are available, or in some cases will soon be available, at the museum enhances the potential for our cooperative efforts. In fact, thanks to the campaign led by this museum a number of years ago, not only are the ITS collections available for research in North America and on continental Europe, but in the United Kingdom and Israel as well. Just a quick reminder, before we begin the conference in earnest, what the ITS collections consist of. Tens of millions of documents relating to at least 17.5 million people who were victimized by the Nazis. People from all across Europe, Jews, of course, and members of virtually every other nationality as well. Millions of concentration camp documents, transport and deportation lists, Gestapo arrest records, and prison records. Millions of pages of forced and slave labor documentation, revealing thousands of government, military, corporate, and other users of forced labor, and the consequences of treating human beings merely as assets to be used up and discarded. Millions of original displaced persons' ID cards, and nearly 500,000 displaced persons' files, often files of whole families who were displaced from their homes, were unable to return home at war's end, and were seeking ways and places to reconstruct their lives. Testimonies taken by liberating forces from concentration camp prisoners immediately on their liberation. Millions of files containing inquiries from around the world from survivors, their families, the families of those who perished, as well as governments, all seeking information in the aftermath of World War II, the Holocaust, and other Holocaust-era crimes, and much more than all of that. When the museum was seeking to open this last huge sealed Holocaust-related archive, the significance of opening ITS was already clear on many levels. The first was moral. That is, fulfilling a moral obligation to Holocaust survivors and their families to provide reassurance that the names and fates of lost loved ones and documentation of their own experiences would not be hidden away forever. Indeed, once the museum began to receive copies of the collection, we were able to respond to over 14,000 inquiries from survivors and families looking for information regarding lost loved ones or even their own experiences during the Holocaust. For us, fulfilling that moral obligation received the highest and most urgent priority. The second area of ITS significance was memorial. The memorial significance of records that identify at least 17.5 million human beings who were victims of the Nazis in their lives doesn't really require any more comment from me this morning. The third area of clear significance related to Holocaust denial. In the face of rising Holocaust denial in all its forms, these tens of millions of pages of irrefutably authentic evidence would serve for all time as a potent weapon against the deniers, the trivializers, the relativizers, and the minimizers. The fourth area, which became clearer as the actions necessary to open ITS became more extreme, was a warning about ourselves, about our organizations, and about our governments. The struggle required to open the ITS archives in the face of their clear moral and memorial significance was a powerful reminder of the ability of even good governments and good organizations to fail to give adequate attention to the voices and concerns of people who are perceived to be powerless. Who, after all, could appear more powerless than the displaced survivors of a genocide, bereft of their families and their possessions, displaced and resettled far from their original homes, and struggling to rebuild some semblance of normality in their lives? Fifth, the ITS records, as we understood them, would provide a graphic warning about the danger of resurgent anti-Semitism. The Nazi regime set out to target Jews. But once ethnic and religious hatred was unleashed, the suffering did not stop with the Jews. Well over half of the documents in the ITS archives deal with the fates of non-Jewish victims of that era. So the ITS archive makes it extraordinarily clear that while anti-Semitism is bad for Jews, it's also extremely dangerous for everyone else. What was less clear at that time was the degree to which the ITS archives would offer new insights and opportunities for advanced research and advanced teaching. Utilized for over 60 years, almost exclusively for person tracing and name search purposes, the general understanding was that the archive contained millions of name cards and name lists of various sorts and provenances, and that its potential for purposes other than name search and person tracing would be minimal. The International Committee of the Red Cross, which at that time administered ITS on behalf of an 11-country international commission, it no longer administers ITS, I should say, made only minimal information regarding the archive's contents available, and fostered this misunderstanding of the archive precisely in order to stifle curiosity and reduce the likelihood that pressure would be brought to bear to open the archive. Thus, in 2008, when it became possible to do so, one of the first things the museum and ITS agreed to do and to sponsor together was a 2-week research workshop at ITS. The 15 scholars who participated were divided into 4 teams and given free rein to explore the collections. then housed in 6 ITS buildings full of paper. And to begin to evaluate and debate the significance of the collections for scholarship, here are a few of the conclusions that they reached. One factor offered particular promise. They all agreed. The ITS collections cover the entire period from the spring of 1933 to the spring of 1945. That is, the entire period of Nazi rule. They also extend through the entire displaced person and resettlement era, to the closing of the last DP camp, and through post-war inquiries and responses. The archive contains material right up until today. Few, if any, other repositories can boast similar chronological coverage of the system of perpetration and its human consequences, the long-term echo of Nazi-era persecution, if you will, from 1933, literally until today, 12th of May, 2014. Thus, the range of possible questions to be explored was immense. The archives could offer a ground-level view of relations among different groups of prisoners, prisoner functionaries, and perpetrators. They would allow the creation of well-documented social histories of some of the camps and open new understanding of prisoner categorization practices and the uses of categorization as a control technique. The records provided unique insights, the group concluded, into the still resonant issue of the power of the state over people's bodies, based on the massive medical and sexual issues-related files of various kinds, as well as unique collections of Lebensborn and child survivor records that can be found there. The forced labor records, including directives of all sorts, labor detail assignments, social insurance records, marriage and birth records of forced laborers, infirmary records, company records, showed forced labor being used everywhere and by everyone. The archives revealed over 25 categories of forced laborers and fluidity in the system. The group that went to the forced labor records exclaimed. As laborers moved or were moved from one category to another, with fewer or greater privileges or risks, according to a variety of factors, some under the control of the perpetrators and users of labor, but some under the control of the laborers themselves. Longitudinal studies of aspects of the forced labor experience over time could also be attempted. One team asserted that they found records on 2,500 camps for survivors, including camps that operated for a time in what became the Soviet zone of Germany. The ITS collections provide massive information about the stages through which DPs passed on the path from prisoner to a future, and the broadest European and global impact of the waves of people who moved through DP camps and on to somewhere else. The records also provide unique opportunities for scholars of the history of medicine, the medical impact of deprivation and experimentation, the challenges of rehabilitation, and the long-term effects. This team also commented on the importance of ITS for the study of the aftermath of genocides. Finally, these are all conclusions from that first study group that explored the documentation. Finally, the ITS records would offer unique opportunities through those post-war inquiry files, the so-called TD, or tracing and documentation files, for victim compensation studies, for study of the geography of memory, and for study of the manner in which the interests and needs of survivors of genocide and mass displacement were managed by the International Tracing Service, by the International Committee of the Red Cross, by the International Commission that governed ITS, and by the international community at large. The collections could also offer greater insight into post-Holocaust behaviors in the, this is a quote from them, the chronological gray zone, or the fluid temporal space from late 1933 through 1948, when perpetrators, victims, victim families, users of forced labor, bystanders, and then DPs, Allied authorities, and potentially implicated perpetrators as well, all lived in a situation of changing prospects and changing perspectives during a period of great uncertainty. In conclusion, those first research scholars in the collections asserted the ITS collections would offer not only an insurance policy against forgetting, but would be a gold mine for scholars. But would researchers and scholars accept the challenges of working in collections that had few finding aids, had been systematically reorganized for the purpose of name search, and where disappointments might be as great as exciting discoveries? This first international conference, dedicated to research carried out in the ITS collections, was designed to see what 5 years of open research access to the ITS collections have produced. I must share with you that we received many more proposals to deliver papers than we could accept. So it's clear that the scholarly discovery of the richness of the ITS collections is a process that's well underway. The quality of the work done thus far by our presenters will speak for itself. One last comment, lest anyone lose sight of how much material needs to be explored when one speaks about the ITS collections. To date, as a result of the scanning and distribution process that's taking place at ITS, the museum has received somewhere on the order of 150 million document scans of material, with what I would estimate to be perhaps another 100 million yet to come before the entire scanning project is complete. The range of the collections, geographically and in terms of subject, provenance, type, etc., as well as their size, is remarkably diverse. Anyone interested in using the material can do so here at the museum in our archives on the 5th floor, or in the Holocaust Victim Resource Center in the Wexner Learning Center on the 2nd floor of the museum. I want to close by thanking the staff at ITS and in the museum's Mandel Center for their outstanding work done to organize this conference. Betsy Anthony, Suzanne Brown Fleming, Joellen Decker, and others in the Mandel Center, the whole support structure of the museum that you will see provide us with an easy day today logistically. Rebecca Boehling and Susanna Urban and others at ITS, you all deserve our appreciation. And of course, I offer thanks as well to the paper presenters, the moderators, and commentators that we'll hear over the next 2 days. Now, let me turn the podium over to my truly outstanding colleague and friend, Dr. Rebecca Boehling. Rebecca, please.
Well, first of all, I want to welcome all of you for being here, and also to express my thanks particularly to Paul Shapiro and to his colleagues Suzanne Brown Fleming and Betsy Anthony here at USHMM, and to my ITS colleague Susanna Urban, who is here with me today. I also want to thank the Jewish Claims Conference for their sponsorship. I'm going to do a PowerPoint to introduce you a little bit more to the history of the ITS, partly because as I read some of the papers for the next 2 days, I was aware that there's still often the misunderstanding that the ITS is or was part of the International Red Cross. We were affiliated with the International Red Cross, but we were never a Red Cross tracing service, and that's very important to understand. The Red Cross, the International Red Cross, administered or managed the ITS from 1955 until 2012, but under the leadership of the International Commission of first 10 and then 11 countries. But I'm going to give you a formal history if I can figure out how to do this. I'm assuming, whoops, end of slideshow. Click to exit. I hope I'm not doing something I'm not supposed to do. Is Betsy out there to help me? Custom slideshow? In the corner? Here? No? Here? Oh, here. Okay, that looks like me. Presentation 1, maybe?
Nope.
Let's see. Here we go. Yes, thank you. Oh, there's a person here to help. Now, how do I get presentation mode?
All right. All set.
Oh, great. And here's my little, oh, good, or my arrows, which I'm more comfortable with. All right. So, I think you all know this, but I did want to stress this, that sometimes because most of you work with the digital collection, there's a tendency to think of the ITS as simply, and I say simply somewhat ironically, a digital collection, but the International Tracing Service is, of course, also a place. So the organizational history of the ITS goes back to actually during the war. It was formed and conceptualized already by UNRWA in Washington in 1943, primarily concerned with how will we deal with the civilian victims and the displaced persons that we are likely to find as a result of Nazi persecution and the war itself. As then planning for the end of war became more serious on a military level, Supreme Headquarters, SHAFE, began this actual planning of registration and DP registration. They began collecting documents, the Allies, as they came into concentration camps, which had recently been abandoned by the SS. Whatever documents still remained, and of course, remember the SS often tried to destroy whatever evidence there might be left behind, but whatever evidence remained was collected by the Allied troops and initially brought to London and then to Paris as France was liberated, and then, as we will see, to Arlsen, as it was called, in the middle of Germany. So from 45 to 47, UNRWA, of course, became a real entity and under the UN Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. And it saw its primary role as identifying and repatriating DPs, or displaced persons. Because, again, I'm thinking as having read these papers, many of you refer to the displaced persons, and because that's a generic term, I always tend to capitalize it when we're talking about the DPs of this period, the displaced persons, because it was I think the term really came into usage in that sense. Even today, in the little town of Arlsen, or Bad Arlsen as it now is, with its spa status, it is often referred to as the IRO by the older generation. They say IRO. And so the International Refugee Organization actually was in charge of tracing for repatriation purposes, for the welfare and immigration purposes, and tracing and reuniting families from 1947, and that's, of course, when it came to Arlsen, to 1951. And then as IRO faded out in that role, the Allied High Commission for Germany, which was the post-occupation organization. Technically, Germany was still occupied, but of course, the Federal Republic and East Germany were formed in 49, and so the status changed. Again, it went from an immediate crisis situation dealing with DPs and trying to help people find family members or find out what happened, to becoming increasingly certifying persecution and clarifying fate for the beginnings of what became in the 50s restitution purposes. So, and again, from 1955 to 2012, the International Committee of the Red Cross was asked to manage the ITS as a tracing service, with a decision made in late 2007, as Paul Shapiro has mentioned, to open up the archives for research, which had gone against the tendency of the ICRC to simply trace and to really not work for the outside world in that sense, and not to think of themselves as at all there for the purpose of research. We know that individual researchers, exceptions were made. People did get to come in occasionally and look at select items, but they never knew what they were seeing in the larger context. So let me see if I can move along here. So, some of the images of documents that you'll see will be familiar to some of you. You've probably seen some of these registration records. Yes. Does anybody know how to do that? Where's my, I assume is there a switch up here or? Okay. Thank you. Shall we go back and just have the images again very quickly? Since I figured out, okay, so that you could read, I'm sure. And you probably get the impression that this is the size of an index card. In fact, many of our records are the size of index cards, which was a particular challenge when scanning began because of the unusual size. Again, this is an index card size. Oh, okay, sorry. Are you not hearing me? Hello. The other one, oh, boy, too many choices here. So, again, I'm stressing this point that the ICRC was a management organization, and that it did so at the behest of an international commission of first 10, then 11 member states. The last country to join the international commission was Poland. So there are 9 European countries, the US and Israel. Between 1955 and 2007, the ITS operated under treaties that were signed in Bonn, Bonn, of course, being the then capital of West Germany, or the Federal Republic. And then in 2011, 2012, new treaties were written. I think they were negotiated for much longer than that. But we are now under the Berlin treaties. All of this information is on the ITS Arlson website. But it was a real challenge to me as I took on this position to recognize what it meant for an organization that for decades had been really closed to the outside world and never had to present itself to the outside world, with a staff that were employed intentionally from the area. It helped, of course, the economy of the area. But the Red Cross, for many, many years, had intentionally not hired staff that had anything, well, that in fact either had an Abitur or a college prep high school degree or more. And you can imagine this has been, as an academic director, a challenge. The people who have worked there for decades are very dedicated, but they were trained to trace, and they were trained to do very specific tasks and not to worry about what others were doing, and often without the kind of historical context that we take for granted. So there have been many challenges, first for my head of research, Susanne Orban, who came several years before me, and now for me, in terms of how, without overwhelming people, do you start to educate them to think in terms of historical context, and to also to think in terms of what public are we serving. So in terms of tracing, we are still receiving between 900 and 1,000 requests a month. So the role of tracing continues, but at the same time, of course, for the last several years, with our focus as well on becoming a recognized research institution. So this is a challenge. It's a challenge particularly because only very incrementally are we able to convert some of the less educated staff to more academically trained staff. So again, this gives you a sense, Paul Shapiro went through it, of some of the type records. And for us, a very big deal last summer, in June, we were recognized as part of UNESCO's Memory of the World Register, which we are very much using to push for a new archives building. Our archives are still distributed across 3 buildings. Paul mentioned that when they came it was 6, and we think it's very important that we have an actual archives building that is built as an archives, that is climatized. Of course, Arleston does not have the climate of Washington, D.C. in terms of humidity, but nevertheless, and it's not just because I'm seeking air conditioning for myself personally, but rather, as you know, in order to preserve particularly wartime and early post-war documents, which was terrible paper, they really need to be stored in a climatized building. So we are working very hard on this. The German government, which is our sole funder, so it's a very unusual situation. The German government funds the ITS and has since 1955, but the ITS answers to an international commission of 11 countries, of which Germany is one. So it makes my dance often between various jurisdictions quite tricky. I'll just put it that way. So in the midst of this transition, we still have over 275 employees. And the work I have tried to reorganize somewhat. As I mentioned before, there was this very compartmentalized orientation towards, okay, I need to know something very deeply about one thing, but I don't need to know where that fits in. And of course, when people make inquiries, either for research purposes or for individual fate purposes, they're dealing with whole people. And in the case of research, often whole groups. And so to only know something about the incarceration period of someone when perhaps that person survived and was in a DP camp and may in fact have worked in slave or forced labor. This is of course one of those hot topics for the next 2 days, forced labor versus slave labor. How do we define those terms? All of these issues are coming up in the papers we're going to be talking about. So our research division has worked very hard to develop also a pedagogical side, to be helping teachers, to be helping students, to really look at how the documents we have can change the way we teach about the Holocaust. So, we are busily, as Paul Shapiro mentioned, digitizing, and we are trying to work on ways to better index our materials so that they are more easily accessible to you as researchers. As you know, you have to go through these various levels of the tree, and sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, look what I found, and you're surprised each time. So we are working on that. The International Commission decided this past summer at its annual meeting that it did want to move towards putting the whole collection on the internet. It's not going to happen overnight, because if we were to do that, if that were even theoretically possible at this point, very few people would know what to do. You know yourself probably how much help you needed to figure out how to access the digital files in ways that made sense. So we're indexing beyond the level of individual names. The reason that was done before is, of course, it was used as a tracing service to find individuals. We have a new head of cataloging and archival description, and again, things were organized as the Allies found them, as they came to Arlington. So figuring out ways to describe that, but also to have some sense of what might I find where, is a challenge, to say the least. And of course, we're trying to develop more flexible software to modernize these searches. So what are my priorities as the new director of the ITS? I'm trying to do things like this, working together with our partner institutions to increase public and scholarly awareness of our holdings, so that people like you, conference participants, come and work in our archives, either in Bad Arolsen or at partner institutions like here at the Holocaust Museum. We also are trying to use this new status of the UNESCO Memory of the World Registry to make sure that we get proper storage for our documents. And we are networking with other Holocaust research and public history institutions. I have to zoom out on Wednesday to London in order to have the ITS become a permanent observer to the International Holocaust Research Alliance, IRA. We're networking with various public history institutions. We're networking with memorials. We're trying to make sure that our information gets coordinated with other sources of information about Nazi persecution. And as I say, I'm trying to, I use the term re-educate. My original field was the immediate post-World War II period, the American occupation of Germany. So I recently had a meeting with the German Foreign Ministry, and on that day I was also giving a talk at the Humboldt University on re-education. And so I just happened to, I said, oh, by the way, I'm talking about re-educating the Germans. So it was an interesting coincidence. So I just want to leave you with what makes us unique. We are an international archive. National privacy laws. We are located in Germany, but we do not fall under German Datenschutz, or privacy law. So the principles that have been developed by the International Commission is 25 years after the receipt. So not after someone has died, not your typical archival restrictions. So we're much more open and accessible than other European countries at any rate. So we're under international control, but paid for by and located in Germany. It's very interesting. In German, we're not allowed to say that we're an international institution, but that we're an institution of international character. But in English, I say international institution. And we're a documentation center created by the Allies with these materials accumulated from the sites of Nazi persecution. So it means that you may go to memorials these days and be able to start to see some of the materials that were there, but that's because we are slowly but surely making some of our materials accessible to those former concentration camps, which are in the meantime, of course, memorials. So what we are trying to do at the ITS is to serve a lot of different purposes. We are trying to still serve these tracing purposes, these so-called humanitarian requests from maybe 3% survivors still. And then we are answering requests often from the first and second generation, wanting to find out about the fate of family members, or in some cases, family members they knew but never asked, and now they want to go back and find out. And of course, we are trying to really develop our research potential so that people can really come in, like you, digitally, and use these materials, because I think those of you who have worked with it, and how many people in the audience, I know that all of the conference participants, but I think I may have others as well here, have actually used the ITS materials. So it looks like about half of you. They are really amazing. There is a little bit of a learning curve, I will admit that. I've seen people nod their heads, yes, learning curve. But the potential for these documents is amazing. So please hang in there. We are trying to make it easier for you, and I'm thrilled to be here today and to be working with the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in making this conference possible. Thank you.